Good evening. I'm Paul Kaufman, and as the Dean of the Faculty of Business and Economics at the University of Melbourne, I am delighted to welcome you to the 2024 CPA Australia University of Melbourne Annual Research Lecture. I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung people, the traditional custodians of the unceded land on which the university community works, learns and lives. We respectfully recognize elders, both past and present. I would like to extend a very cordial welcome to Georgina Fortem, the President of the Victorian Division, CPA Australia, and her fellow council members. I also welcome our presenter for tonight's lecture, the 85th in the series, Mr. Mel Yates, who will shortly be introduced in more detail. I am pleased that we are joined by colleagues from far afield and across industry and academia. I would like to welcome delegates from the CPA Congress, staff and students of the university, members of CPA Australia, and of the profession and the general public. Of all the lecture series that we host at the University of Melbourne, and as I'm told, possibly the world, this one is the longest running. It was first presented by Sir Alex Fitzgerald in 1940. Sir Alex was a leader in education, a pioneer in accounting research, and was the second to serve in the role of head of department at the University of Melbourne. His brother, Garrett, was also a key figure in accounting, and a professorial chair in the department now bears their name. Both Alex and Garrett have been inducted into the Australian Accounting Hall of Fame. It is indeed a proud tradition that continues tonight. Our presenter, Mr. Mel Yates, continues the long line of prominent speakers who have gone before him to tackle challenging questions, present new ideas, and find better ways of understanding the field of accounting. I now invite the head of the Department of Accounting, Professor Brad Potter, to introduce tonight's speaker. Brad.
Thank you, Paul, and g'day everyone. As the head of the Department of Accounting, it's my great pleasure to welcome you tonight. A special welcome to colleagues from CPA Australia, one or two of whom Paul has mentioned, but I pay particular thanks to Dale Pinto, President and Chair of the Board, and Chris Freeland, CEO. Welcome to you and your colleagues. I join with Paul in acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we stand, and extend that acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the lands from which you've come to watch this tonight. It's now my great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Mr. Mel Yates. Mel has extensive experience in public administration. He joined the ACNC in 2016, and he led the collection of reporting from Charities with a particular focus on reducing unnecessary regulatory burden. Admirable task, Mel. Mel also ensured that from 2018, the ACNC had sound corporate governance arrangements. Prior to working at the ACNC, he spent a decade at the Australian Taxation Office. I paused for impact there. Working across compliance, assurance, operational financial management, internal policy, government tax and management roles. Mel also worked for the Victorian Government in a finance role. After graduating from the university with a Bachelor of Business in Accounting and Computing Information Systems, he started his career at a large professional services firm and travelled the world working in England in social services finance role. He's a fellow of CPA Australia and possibly the best dressed Victorian Divisional Council Deputy President. In August 24, he was appointed Corporate Services Director at Tax Practitioners Board for a 6-month period. I'm really looking forward to your presentation tonight, Mel. I've heard you speak before, you're an entertaining speaker, and we look forward to what you've got to talk to us about. The title of the presentation is Charity Reporting, Exploring the Balance Between Necessary Trust and Confidence and Unnecessary Burden. Mel, the floor is yours, and folks, please join with me in welcoming Mel.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you, Paul, as well. So good evening, everyone, and welcome. I do want to begin by acknowledging the people who have helped and supported me to make tonight possible. So thank you very much. It does mean a lot. Oh, there we go. I should also highlight that I am an Australian public servant. So I am here of my own volition. My views that I'm expressing tonight are mine and mine alone. They're not representative of the Australian government or the ACNC. So please bear that in mind. And obviously the information, slides, recording will be available at a future point in time. Now, as has been alluded, tonight is interactive. So please, if you haven't joined Slido, I invite you to use the QR code, link up, ask your questions, participate. There will be opportunities for you to express your views and participate in this evening. There is a question already posed for you, and that question is, what's the first word that comes to mind when you think of charity? So I'll let you think about that and complete that, and I'll jump in. Now, I want to start with some key information about the charity sector in Australia. Now, many Australians are connected in some way to charities. It might be you, it might be a family member, it might be a friend. 3.5 million people volunteer in supporting Australian charities. 1.47 million people are employed by Australian charities. That's 10.5% of the Australian workforce. You might be a board member, a director, a responsible person, as the ACNC calls them, under the legislation. You might be a service user of a charity. Some of the most common activities that charities provide are religion, education, and human services. Or you might donate to the almost $14 billion that charities received in the 2022 reporting period from the community through donations and bequests. The most common beneficiary of charities in Australia are adults aged 25 to 64. You might have a child that goes to a non-government school. We're here today at the University of Melbourne, one of Australia's largest charities by revenue and by employee numbers. There are more than 61,000 registered charities in Australia. 6% of those operate overseas. Close to half of all charities earn less than $250,000 in revenue per year. That's half of the sector are in that smaller size. A third, almost a third I should say, of registered charities in Australia earn revenue of $50,000 or less. So quite a small amount of money to be providing services to beneficiaries and the community. An interesting fact is that that third of the sector have only 0.1% of the entire sector's income. So a third of charities earn 0.1% of the entire amount of income that flows to charities. On the other end of the scale, at the larger end, which includes the University of Melbourne, 0.5% of charities, so 0.5% of all Australian charities, earn revenue of $100 million or more per year. Now, that 0.5% of the sector earns half of the entire revenue across the whole sector. So 0.5% of charities earn half of all revenue. 51% of charities operate with no staff. So bearing in mind that 10.5% of the workforce are employed by charities, 51%, the majority, do not employ anyone. In fact, nearly 90% of extra small charities, so that's the group that I talked about, the third, they, generally speaking, 90% of them do not have any paid staff. Now, how do we know this? Where am I getting this information from? This information is all publicly available. It's collected by the ACNC, the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission. This information is collected each year from charities, it's analysed, it's reported, and then it's made available free to the public for what I would consider public benefit and public good. And I'll get into a little bit more about how that information can be accessed, but tonight this is my focus. The information that is collected about charities in Australia by the ACNC, contrasting that with the burden or the red tape that may be placed onto those organisations that have to provide that information. So I'm looking at that balance, information collection and red tape. And there is the link to the Charities report. I have been referring to the 10th edition of that tonight, which was released in June of this year. Now, going back to that question that I posed, so the biggest or most popular words were community, giving, donations. Another popular one was generosity. There's some other interesting ones: inefficient, corruption, ability to give, not-for-profit, purpose, help, goodwill service, altruism. So there's a very diverse range of views about the charity sector. Everyone has different perceptions and everyone has a different experience of the charity sector in Australia. And I think therein lies some of the challenges, which I'll get to shortly. Now, a little bit of context. So why did the Australian government create the ACNC? Well, in 2010, the Productivity Commission, who provide independent advice and research to government, they released a research report titled The Contribution of the Not-for-Profit Sector. And that had a recommendation to create a national registrar for not-for-profits, to consolidate Commonwealth regulation and provide a single portal for corporate and financial reporting. And that's when the government, or the Parliament rather, the government of the day into the Parliament introduced the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission Bill of 2012. Now, the explanatory memorandum that accompanied that bill, that talked about what it contained and the benefits and the purposes and all of that information, it talked about creating the ACNC as a Commonwealth regulator for the not-for-profit sector. And it also talked about, initially, only tax-endorsed charities would be included in this regulatory regime. But it established a regime and a framework that could be expanded to other not-for-profits. And I do want to touch on that distinction. All charities are for public benefit. They must be not-for-profit. However, there are many not-for-profit organisations that cannot be a registered charity. So not-for-profit and charity are two very distinct terms. Now, the explanatory memorandum talked about some of the challenges that the government had in quantifying information about this sector, because there wasn't reliable information at a scale that the government could use to justify the creation of the ACNC and outline the benefits that were going to be provided, which I think is quite interesting, because going back to what I'm talking about, the collection of information about charities, which is one of the primary goals of the ACNC, making that available, that didn't exist before the ACNC was created. Now, it talked about not-for-profits playing a unique role in Australia. As a result, governments fund charities indirectly and directly, as well as the community through donations and bequests. Therefore, this unique role means that governments afford these organisations special treatment by way of tax concessions. So taxpayers are foregoing monies in order to support these organisations, and therefore the government felt that it was reasonable there should be some level of accountability. There should be reporting and information made available about these organisations that people can access and view and interrogate. So, the ACNC was created with three primary objects. To maintain, protect and enhance public trust and confidence. I won't dwell on the middle one, the words are there. They're important words. The third object is basically to reduce red tape. So on the one hand, build and maintain public trust and confidence in the charity sector, but don't do it in a way that's going to burden the sector. So it's an interesting tension there in those two objects. So, the ACNC was established in 2012 and progressively the regulatory framework was put into place. Charities started reporting in 2013. The following year they had to provide financial information in 2014. And we now have a situation where the ACNC has developed a vast amount of information and resources that are available to organisations that have to comply with these obligations. So one of the primary focuses of the ACNC is to develop and support organisations to meet their obligations. As I said, there's 61,000 registered charities. Their information is available free of charge. Where they are, what they do, who they help, their finances, it is all there and available for public consumption. I do want to highlight that in 22-23, there were 8.6 million searches of the charity register. Looking at programs that charities run, information about charities, where they are, who runs them. So one of the things that the ACNC framework created was this requirement for organisations to meet governance standards. And organisations that meet governance standards can use the registered charity tick to promote that they are a registered charity, they're complying with minimum standards, they're meeting the minimum benchmark, the core minimum that is expected in order to access those privileges, those tax concessions, and be treated in a special way in society. Now, one of these governance standards I do just want to call out because there is a requirement on charities to make sure that they're responsible people, and that is their board members, their trustees, directors, whatever you would like to call them, meet minimum duties. The onus is on the charity to make sure that the charity ensures that the board or these people who are running the organisations and making decisions meet these minimum standards. And those governance standard 5 duties are to act with reasonable care and diligence, to act honestly and fairly, not misuse their position, disclose conflicts of interest, ensure that financial affairs of the charity are managed responsibly, and not allow the charity to be insolvent. Now, the reason that I call those out and highlight them are that for accountants in the room, CPA members, these are very close to the fundamental principles which we must uphold. So I think there's a very interesting relevance there that these organisations must be well run. They are for the public benefit. Accountants work for the public interest. And so I think it's really important to note that the expectations of these organisations is very akin and similar to the professionals who are providing support and services in terms of governance to these organisations. Now, I do want to highlight some of the progress that the ACNC has achieved also in relation to reducing red tape. I'll talk about this in more detail shortly, but sharing data across government has been very fundamental to the effectiveness of the ACNC and what it has achieved to date. There's been streamlining arrangements put in place. There's been some harmonisation of reporting requirements. There's been research done about how to minimise red tape for organisations that fit within this regulatory regime. And, as I said earlier, importantly, one of the core functions of the ACNC has been to make sure that education guidance materials are available to the sector so they understand what they must do to meet their obligations. Now, what's collected from charities in terms of their reporting? So there's two elements. We have an annual information statement, which is the vehicle through which the ACNC collect data, and that's information about a charity, what they do, who they help, where they operate, as well as, depending on size, financial reporting. So medium and large-sized organisations, bearing in mind that the size of an organisation is based on revenue each year. Those medium and large organisations have to provide financial statements, and there are additional elements that they must provide, and therein lies a little bit of proportionality. Smaller organisations, more likely to be run by volunteers, they have smaller reporting obligations. But once we get into a medium-sized organisation, which has revenue of 500,000 or more, into that large size, there is a little bit more that needs to be provided. And there is assurance of the financial reporting as a minimum element. A review for medium-sized organisations and audit for large-sized organisations. Now, the financial statements, there is flexibility. They can be special purpose financial statements, they can be general purpose financial statements, depending on whether the organisation is a reporting entity. Accounting standards apply to reporting. There are minimum standards for special purpose accounts and obviously general purpose, depending on whether you're using a simplified regime or full general purpose financial statements, will determine the standard or standards that you need to follow. The financial statements are also available on the ACNC register. So if you want to look up a particular organisation that you're interested in, it is all there and it is all available. I do want to highlight that there is research that came out of the US by Harris and Neely that talked about where information is made available about not-for-profit organisations, it builds trust and confidence. So much so that where information is available, the more information that is available, the more people will donate. So there is a relationship from this research that shows where information is available, that helps to build trust and confidence, and it actually entices and makes people more comfortable to give more in terms of donations. So, is this the information that we should be collecting about charities? I'm interested in your views. What information do you think is important to know about charities? So please, I encourage you, get your phones out, have a think, and let me know your thoughts. A little bit about the reporting. So if we type red tape reduction into a browser, we will come up with lots of results showing that governments are committed to reducing red tape. A lot of the work of governments, whatever level of government, whatever political party, there will generally be a flavour of working to reduce red tape for efficiency, for better effectiveness. But there aren't many organisations like the ACNC that was created with this mandate built into its DNA. So the ACNC is quite unique. Now, the ACNC cannot ask charities anything it wants because of this red tape reduction object. There are also restrictions based on legislation as to what can be asked. Now, I'm just looking at some of these thoughts. So purpose is obviously a popular one. Objectives, administration costs. That's always something common that comes up for people. Financials, benefits, political leaning, ethical, integrity of suppliers. So again, a vast view, different ranges of views about what people think is important. Now, I do want to touch on this recognised assessment activity, which is what limits the ACNC to ask information about charities. It's limited to information the Charities Commissioner needs to know about the entity's compliance with the Act, their compliance with a taxation law, or their compliance with the Act and regulations. And there is also a connection there to the Tax Commissioner. So, the ACNC largely implemented the financial information that government said should be collected about charities. Did some consultation about the other things that should be asked, and that is the information which is collected each year. Now, in 2016, there was a little bit of consultation done, and the ACNC decided to expand the revenue elements to include information about revenue that is derived from goods or services, as well as revenue from investments. So there's more breadth across revenue sources to provide better granularity as to where charities get their revenue from. I should mention that the ACNC commissioned some research in 2014 that was done by Ernst & Young, which found that the ACNC burden through the reporting that is imposed on charities represented 0.1% of all of the reporting burden. The rest of that burden was a combination of state and territory reporting, acquittals for funding and acquittals for grants, fundraising requirements, and a whole raft of other things. So I think that finding that 0.1% of the burden related to the ACNC shows that the ACNC is really a fairly light touch regulation and regulator who administers the framework for charities. Now, a little bit on how the reporting is used to reduce red tape. So charity reports, they do their information statement, their financial report if they need to. It goes onto the charity register, which is publicly available. Then that data is shared in various ways. Data is made available on data.gov.au, a central government repository of data for all sorts of things. There's some very interesting data sets on there. The charity register search functionality obviously is enabled, But the charity passport is something a bit unique and a bit novel that the ACNC implemented. Charity passport, because that is a report once used often framework. We collect a lot of information from charities which goes to the ACNC, and then that information is reused and shared with other government agencies, state and territory governments across the Commonwealth, so that charities are not needing to provide the same information again and again to different regulators and different levels of government. So that is one of the key red tape reduction elements that has been embedded into the ACNC. Now, I do want to move to some of the data elements, and I have just picked a couple of things that I think are interesting. When charities register with the ACNC, they need to be registered under what's called a subtype. That's like a category of charity. And I've just pulled out some of the subtypes over the last 10 years, and I've focused on ones where there is change. So there are other subtypes I haven't reflected here that have stayed pretty static. But this shows that over the 10-year period, the number of organisations registered as charities that have a subtype of religion and education are dropping. Those that have a subtype of social welfare, health, culture, environment are increasing. Now, this is interesting because it tells us what is happening, but it doesn't tell us the why. So I could speculate and say, well, society's changing. There are reforms which have been implemented and imposed on many organisations, particularly in that education and religion space. Royal commissions, for example, changing governance structures, mandating certain things. Maybe that's driving some of these changes. But is it? I don't know. Something else that I thought was interesting here is over the last 6 years, this is showing the percentage of donations that charities receive as a share of total revenue over the last 6-year period. Now that shows that the extra small, medium and large sized charities, not the very large or the extra large, but the smaller end of the sector, are increasing their percentage of revenue that they get through donations. Again, is that a good thing? Is that a problem? Government fund over half of the charity sector in total. So again, this shows us something, but it doesn't necessarily tell us the why these things are happening. And then when I go and have a look at this information, this is the growth in revenue over the last 5-year period. Now focus first on the white. The white bars represent the growth totally across the charity sector, and that ranges between 5 and 8% growth annually. So looking at that in isolation, that's pretty good, I would think. Charity revenue is growing between 5 and 8% a year. But then when you look at the orange bars represent the extra large sized charities. So that's the likes of the University of Melbourne, and I'm not picking on the University of Melbourne, it is just that we are here tonight. Extra large sized charities take the lion's share of that revenue growth. So if extra large sized charities are taking more of that revenue growth, what does that mean for the other smaller sized organisations? For example, the smalls had negative growth for 3 out of those 5 years. So there is insights and value in looking at the data, but understanding what it means is the question. So there is power in this. You can overlay information sources, which starts to add the value to the data which is being collected and which has been made available. So the benefit, I think, is hopefully fairly clear, that this allows research, it allows consideration, it allows the formation of policy. But what about the cost? So what about the cost of all of this data? Now, there has to be some cost in regulation. There is always going to be a cost in regulation by the very nature of regulation occurring. If we didn't have any regulation of the charity sector, we wouldn't have this reporting. Could we assume that all organisations are going to do the right thing all the time? No. Hopefully they would, but regulation is there to weed out those charities that are not behaving in the way they should, and by virtue of this regulation, we have the data available to us. Now, since the ACNC came into being, there's been a range of changes that have happened over that period of time. But if I look at all of those things, most of those changes relate to the financial reporting. Now, if I think about charities as organisations, they are there for public benefit. So I think financial reporting is clearly important. We want to understand how organisations are using their money. But what else is happening? What other information might we want to know? And these changes, which pretty much relate to financial reporting, are they enough to maintain trust and confidence moving forward? So I do want to call out a couple of small unresolved things. The top one is basically an internal government problem. There is a charity register with information about charities. Some of those organisations are also on the ASIC register, and they have different information. That's a problem because you've got the same organisation with different information, which creates confusion. So I would say that that undermines trust and confidence, and it imposes red tape on charities. The other thing which I think is a little bit more complex is a single definition of charity. Now, there are 172 different pieces of Commonwealth, state and territory regulation and legislation which have references to charity, charitable purpose and charitable status. There are 45 definitions across that number. So I would suggest that organisations which exist for the public benefit are trying to navigate a very complex landscape in terms of understanding the different definitions of charity and what the different requirements are in a government context at a state, federal, local level. So, thinking about current reforms. There currently are a range of reforms happening for not-for-profit organisations which self-assess as income tax exempt. And that's a change that was implemented by government in 2021. What is this going to mean? It's going to mean that the population of charities in Australia will expand. Those organisations will have to provide the same information that charities do. They'll be accustomed to the same rules that apply to charities. That information will be available on the register. Those organisations will be more visible, and so on. If I look at ESG, environmental, social and governance, there is a lot happening in this space, and there is a lot of, a lot of chatter, a lot of media, a lot of commentary about what this is going to mean, particularly to the accounting profession. So, the government have very recently mandated new reporting requirements for some organisations, generally very large organisations and financial institutions. They are going to require those organisations to provide climate-related financial disclosures. Now, that doesn't apply to charities because charities are not generally large organisations, and it's being implemented in a way through the Corporations Act and through standards that won't touch on charities. But my question is that right? We've got an evolving environment, an evolving landscape, yet we have pretty static reporting for charities that only covers financial information as well as the activities the organisation undertake. There are going to be more changes. Again, these are largely in relation to financial reporting. We're probably going to see in the next couple of years, not probably, it's very likely, this is an active project of the Australian Accounting Standards Board. It's been going for a couple of years. It's trying to provide a consistent, comparable framework for organisations that may not be meeting minimum standards in terms of the way their financial reports are being prepared. So that will affect charities who prepare special purpose financial statements. The intent is that this would apply to those organisations which are considered medium-sized charities. It's still in train, it's still being developed. There's a lot of water to flow under the bridge, but it's something worth noting and being aware of. My question to you is, would trust and confidence in charities be improved if charities had to provide information about their performance against what they say they are doing? They are created for public benefit for a charitable purpose. Do you think charities should have to provide information about that in order to help public trust and confidence? So looking at the results, we've got yes for 100% of responses. Oh, a couple of maybes. There's an absence of no. So the vast majority, 88%, 89%, think yes. So, in summary, the ACNC has collected a lot of information about charities, and this is available to you, to researchers, to the public, about the organisations which, as a taxpayer, you are supporting through those concessions, benefits, exemptions that these organisations are entitled to. We have a lot of data available, but is it the right data? Now, the ACNC has achieved lots of things in terms of red tape reduction, and I think a balance has been met between the benefit and the burden on those organisations. But what information do we need as our world changes, our world keeps evolving, but yet the reporting landscape for charities largely remains the same, with a few tweaks around the side. So I thought it would be remiss of me in 2024 to provide a presentation without using artificial intelligence. So I just plugged in to ChatGPT, is charity reporting necessary for trust and confidence or unnecessary burden? And I did this on the 7th of September after I had written and prepared my presentation. And I found it really interesting that the last dot point, I was quite shocked actually, the last dot point, in the end, while the burden of reporting can be significant, the benefits of maintaining transparency and accountability often outweigh the drawbacks. Many argue that effective reporting is a vital component of maintaining the trust and confidence necessary for a thriving charitable sector. Thank you very much. That takes us to Q&A.
Mel, if I can ask you one or two from Slido. So the first one's from Jane. Do you think the exemptions for basic religious charities are justifiable given the large size and influence of some of these charities?
Bearing in mind that I'm not representing the Australian government and I'm here representing myself, I actually do think that the exemptions for basic religious charities are unreasonable. In light of many factors, I think the landscape has changed. They are very effective lobbyists, but I think there is justification more and more that these organisations should have to provide a little bit more visibility of how they use their resources. My personal view only.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Mel. So we've got one.
Thank you for your presentation. I would like to know what's your suggestions for the charity investment?
For charities investing?
Investing and all the transparency and all the other regulations.
So if I understand what you're getting at, charities need to be very careful in the way they invest resources and funds. There is obviously risk associated with any investment, and depending on the risk appetite of the organisation will determine what would be appropriate or not appropriate. I think the important thing for me is that governance piece. So the board, the trustees, whoever it is, should be determining their risk appetite and determining what is appropriate for the organisation to be investing in. So there are requirements under certain, there are certain requirements for transparency and visibility depending on the size of the organisation. But I think for me that piece is the risk and making sure that that adequate governance is in place, that the organisation has thought about it. And it might actively want to have a really aggressive strategy. I don't know necessarily why that might be the case, but different organisations need to set their own path. They need to think about that and they need to be alive and in tune with making sure that they've thought about the decisions they make, they're documented, because a key requirement of charities is that they keep records, financial records and operational records.
Right, we've got another one in the room.
Hi there, Mel.
Hello.
You'd be disappointed if I didn't have a question for you. I think earlier on you said that there was 6% of the charities in Australia were global. Just interested in your thoughts about how the ACNC reporting and regulation sits opposite other significant global comparatives.
Good question, Marcel. I think the context in Australia is that charities have their framework. There are some other jurisdictions that have a very separate, distinct charity reporting framework. One thing that I think we are so lucky in Australia is it is digital by default. The ACNC is all digital by default. If you want a paper form, there's only, I think it's now down to about 0.5% of organisations that lodge using paper, which is phenomenal. Because I've had stories told to me, particularly in the States, where regulators have rooms of filing cabinets where they've got to literally file that paper reporting, and it's not necessarily available or visible. It can't be used. So I think there are some major advances that we have in what we've achieved, but nothing is perfect. And sometimes I think having that bespoke, tailored reporting for charities as opposed to the sector neutral approach that we have in Australia, there could be benefits in having something more, more linked to not-for-profits and charities more broadly.
All right, we might go back to Slido, Mel, because Slido's going nuts at the moment. So we've got one from Michelle. So has the ACNC considered what types of tangible support might be provided to a typical NFP finance team to improve what is provided to auditors?
That's a really good question. So we have tried where possible to create things that are useful to particularly the smaller end of the sector. So we have a checklist and we have different resources available. So I would strongly encourage you to have a look at the ACNC website. There is a financial reporting hub which has lots of information, resources. So that would be my starting point. But certainly the ACNC is open to hearing feedback. If there is something in particular that is missing or you think would be useful, then I would encourage you to feed that back to the ACNC and that will be considered.
Okay, I'm on a roll here. So,
hang on 1 minute,
I'm
Brandon,
butting
sorry.
in. I just have a quick question and a point. Not so much about the financial reporting, but the details of charities. How accurate do you think that reporting is? I mean, it's quite. The questions are quite broad, and if used for, future investment, how much can they be relied on?
It's a good question, and the reality is that, like any regulator, there are quality assurance processes, there are mechanisms in place, but I think the reality is we cannot guarantee everything which is reported by organisations is 100% correct. So it's an ongoing challenge. Definitely one of the biggest things that the ACNC tries to do is try to learn and understand what the challenges are and develop resources and change things in order to try and support compliance. It's the nature of the charity sector. For the bulk of organisations, each year potentially they've got a new committee and there might be succession planning challenges, so people might be starting off fresh, new each year, and the ACNC is very in tune with that. And that's why we focus so much on trying to develop the resources and tools and usable, relevant products that the sector can use, and even some fundamental things. We've got a governance for good product that we encourage charities to give to new board members. And there's a suite of resources to try to give them basic understanding of some of the fundamental things that they need to be aware of and need to understand.
And just my final point, do you think they'll ever fix the ASIC where you've got the reporting, because it's incredibly confusing to people, particularly in larger not-for-profit?
And I don't think I've ever given any presentation where it hasn't been raised. We were hopeful because there was a program of work that was going to fix that, but that was axed. And so we're trying to think about it, and we have a very good relationship with ASIC. So the ACNC Commissioner, Sue Woodward, has met with ASIC a number of times. We're both committed as organisations to fix it, but there are practical challenges that stop the solution being implemented like that. So I am hopeful it will happen one day. I'm just hopeful that it's sooner rather than later.
all right, so Mel, we have a number of questions here, but we've got time for maybe one more, and then unfortunately we have to wrap up. So this one is from Matt. So why do different federal, state and territory reporting regimes exist for charities still and haven't been consolidated under the ACNC?
So basically it comes down to the federation. That's fundamentally, we have worked and streamlined things wherever possible, but because of the makeup of Australia, the Commonwealth cannot overrule a state, and so it's all about relationships and working together to try and improve the outcomes, but it relies on goodwill from both parties, depending on the political cycles that each jurisdiction has. That's been a practical challenge. You can have a lot of goodwill, but if you don't have the support of the government, at a particular point in time, then things take time to implement. So I can't really answer that question because it's a fundamental challenge that I don't know that we'll ever resolve. I would like to think that we will, and I'm hopeful, but time will tell.
Okay. All right. Unfortunately, time is up, Mel. But I do want to pause and thank you sincerely for a very informative and interesting address. You've given us many matters to consider, particularly as a researcher, things to go away and think about, which is the essence of what we're doing here and the reason why we're here. You've talked to us a lot about what the ACNC has done in its short existence and the role and the implications for accountants and assurance providers. And you've alluded to some of the challenges, which is, some really good material for us all to think about. So I thank you very seriously, very sincerely. Please join with me in thanking Mel.
Thank you, Brad.
The Dean, Professor Kaufman, to come up and present you with the University Medal.
You might have seen it before, Mel. Wonderful lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mel, for an enlightening lecture. For those who know me, I'm not great at keeping to a script, so seeming this is recorded and at a university, I'll try my best. My name is Georgina Fordham, as I was introduced before, and I'm the current Victorian Divisional Council President of CPA Australia. As a volunteer for CPA, I was completely unaware of the number of volunteers that are in our community. However, as Mel mentioned, there are currently 3.5 million volunteers registered within Charities. However, this does not include additional volunteers that are involved in organisations not registered as charities. As someone who has worked across multiple sectors, I know the importance of good governance. Good governance does make a difference to how any organisation is seen within our community. For many, this is important as they are financially supported by external organisations or avenues, for example, government-funded or philanthropic funds. As Mel highlighted though, after being in finance function, the reporting can be quite onerous. For those accountants in the room, I can assure you it is difficult and I've been there. But only some of this reporting is actually going to the ACNC. So where is the balance? With the benefit of having 10 years of data in it, it seems that information is a fundamental part of transparency, accountability, and overall governance. It is great to see that government organisations can work together to make reporting easier. This allows for information sharing and enables savings and efficiencies to be realised by charities. The current changes taking place for accountants over the next few years with the introduction of ESG requirements and the implementation of AI mean that accountants are ultimately at the forefront of these changes. They need to understand what this change means. They need to prepare reporting around it and educate not only their clients but also their peers of the changes ahead. Accountants need to provide assurance that what is being reported is credible. The fundamental principles of being an accountant in terms of our ethical requirements include, and not utmost, integrity. To be straightforward and honest in all professional and business relationships. We have objectivity, to exercise professional and/or business judgment without being compromised. We have a degree of professional competence and due care. If you're on a board of a charity, you can now be held legally liable if that charity is to go under. We have a degree of confidentiality, to respect the confidentiality of information acquired as a result of professional and business relationships. And we have to behave in a professional manner. Regardless of what the future holds, accountants will experience change to reforms, reporting, and increased reliance on technology. Whatever lies ahead, accountants are ready to be guided by the fundamental principles that our profession requires we uphold, to act in the best interest of the public. I think the exercise today of asking us as stakeholders what we want to know about charities shows that engagement with stakeholders to understand what they want could lead to reporting that will be valued and be an exercise in building trust and confidence, but without unnecessary burden. It's hard to know whether or not across 61,000 registered charities, stakeholders for one organisation will want the same reporting as those of the next organisation. But I think it's something that's definitely worth exploring into the future. Thank you, Mel, for your abundance of knowledge in this space, and thank you for all of you for attending tonight.